Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemens, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thank you for joining us for Building the Dream, the housing affordability agenda. This is the culmination of our three-part series on housing affordability. We've been on the ground in Charlotte and Minneapolis in the pre-COVID era, and now we're coming to you virtually for a timely discussion on the future of housing policy as a new administration waits in the wings. Still reeling from the COVID-19 health crisis, Americans face an uncertain post-election future. As the next administration sets its recovery agenda, housing could be a critical piece of the puzzle, and we know it will be. I'd like to thank our sponsor, the National Association of Home Builders, for their support of today's conversations. Heading into 2021, homeowners will be facing the pinch of an economic crisis, the expiration of moratoriums, and a fear of foreclosures that could further exacerbate the homeownership gap in this country. Additionally, the increased cost of home building could mean increased price points for home buyers, an added hurdle for first-time buyers. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers to help us sort out these challenges, including policymakers, members of Congress, and housing experts. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag The Hill Building the Dream. I have to talk to my team about the number of letters that is, but it's The Hill Building the Dream. Maybe it'll be BTD next time. We're broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. As with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble with the video, and I'm told, never works for me, but hopefully for you, refreshing the page should fix the problem. Senator Sherrod Brown is the ranking member on the Senate Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee. The coronavirus pandemic has touched every part of our lives, and housing is no exception. Senator Brown has been advocating for rental assistance as well as housing counseling so that renters and homeowners can better understand their options in these trying times. Senator Brown, it's great to see you again. I have to start this by saying that one of the things that I've always been a fan of yours is the lapel pin of the canary in the cage, is sort of the canary in the coal mine. And so when it comes to thinking about the affordability of housing and just the way the economy is put together right now, what are those things? You know, I think of the canary. What is the canary that you're worried about at this moment?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for saying that. I wear when I wear a suit, which is not as often these days, a depiction of a canary in a coal mine. We know the story. Yeah. The mine worker took the canary down in the mines, and if the canary died, the mine worker essentially is on his own. He had no union in those days strong enough or government that cared enough to protect him. And it really does warn of not just toxic gases, but in a mine, but of other things in our society. And we know through this pandemic, especially when McConnell and Trump cut off the $600 a week unemployment benefit, we know that thousands of people a day are falling into poverty. And a big part of that is potential eviction or foreclosure. And if we've had a moratorium on eviction, but lots of people fall through those cracks, if you will. And even at the end of the moratorium, if that's the end of December, whatever it is, people will owe 6-7 months of rent they can't pay because they didn't get unemployment and they can't find jobs. And we will have an even worse pandemic public health crisis if more people end up in a homeless shelter, more people end up on the streets, more people end up sleeping in their cousin's basement. I mean, it's awful to think of that with winter approaching. It's even more awful to think of it with this pandemic. So government's first role is to stop this massive wave of evictions that's about to hit us.
Do you think that with President-elect Biden coming in, we've got 2 months of the Trump administration still in place. Do you think they're going to be able to put together another package to get that relief out to people and businesses? I mean, I just sort of see this heart attack in slow motion evolving right now as capital dries up in the country.
Well, your diagnosis is exactly right. Whether Mitch McConnell wants to really get serious about the cure, and the cure is long term in jobs and getting the coronavirus, address it and deal with it, and then the economy can grow after that. But the economy can't grow as long as people are having to deal with this coronavirus of 1,500 deaths a day now, or at least the last couple of days, thousands of new cases in my state every day. And it's affecting everybody. I think the highest rates right now in the country are in Minot, North Dakota, which was barely touched by it many weeks ago. So I hope that Senator McConnell responds to that. And it means unemployment benefits. It means dollars to local school districts so they can reopen safely, because kids just can't learn from home nearly as well as in-person learning, and not to mention the mental health issues involved. It means helping small businesses. I mean, the government's got to, you think about the first coronavirus package back in March, it kept 12 million people out of poverty, 12 million people. Now that most of that essentially is run out, help for businesses, help for unemployed workers, help for schools, help for people to stay in their apartments and their homes, that's run out. Thousands of people a day are falling into poverty. We did it right back in March. Senator McConnell just says he sees no sense of urgency since. And I'm hoping now that the election's over, he'll come to the table and pass a package that will really affect people's lives, begin to do contact tracing, testing, contact tracing, protective equipment, all the things we need to do to combat the virus, get serious about it, and then move forward on our economy.
Well, I hope that works out. Well, Senator, one of the other things that we're looking at today in this forum is on housing affordability. And I think the jury's still out. If you're objective and you take a look, there's a reshuffling in the country right now that those with assets and means, but there's also low-income folks that are trying to find other ways to live their lives. And I have a place on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and I see folks moving out there away from dense urban areas as well. And so there's a reshuffling going on in the country. And it's raising this question about housing stock and where we're at. As you look at it, what are the equities we have to get right when we think about the affordability of housing?
Oh, thank you for that question, Steve. There are millions of people in this country who are very vulnerable to sort of any setback in terms of what they can do to just stay in a safe, affordable, accessible home. For instance, 1/4 of renters, this was pre-pandemic, it's gotten worse clearly. 1/4 of renters in this country a year ago, say in January, beginning of this year, 1/4 of renters pay more than half their income in rent. So if one thing goes wrong, their car breaks down, or just one thing goes wrong, their child gets sick and has to stay home from school and they have to take off work, or if they get a minor workplace injury and miss 2 weeks of work, their whole world can turn upside down because then they can't pay the rent. Matthew Desmond, the author of Evicted, said the rent eats first. If you can't pay your rent, all kinds of bad things happen. Your kid has to change school districts and ends up in a district where other kids are in and out of the classroom, and disruption for the teacher, disruption for the school, disruption for the kids, all those things that go wrong if you get evicted, not to mention the COVID. So we first need to deal with eviction, but we absolutely need a housing policy that will encourage partnerships in building more housing, and Section 8 and other kinds of ways to build housing. As you said, people moving to the Eastern Shore, part of that is housing's gotten so expensive in metropolitan areas, but so cheap in many ways other places still. And we've got to find ways to encourage growth in those areas, but we've got to find ways to build a partnership that people can, in fact, afford to have a decent, clean, accessible place to live.
You know, I'm wondering, and I'm just thinking out loud here, that after you've seen, what's happened with the protests around the country after the George Floyd murder, after when you look at economic inequality in the United States, you look at the way that this pandemic has hit different communities, there's just a lot of social contract messiness right now out there. And it's just, I'm wondering, recently we were in Minneapolis and looked at some changes in regulation about housing, and basically loosened it up, and it's created sort of a protest from the wealthy folks in town. But do you think that these high drama protests at this moment are going to get those people who have means to understand that with regulatory shifts, whatever, you can help create opportunities for low income and for other parts of the economic spectrum that we're not doing today? I know it's a loaded question, but it just seems to me that something's got to give in the social contract if you're going to help take care of the housing and rental needs of people with lesser means.
Yeah, you need leadership, and Joe Biden, first of all, won't try to divide people and play off race against race, black against white and Latino. He won't try to play off city versus suburb or metro versus rural area. You start with that. But it's going to take some creative developers and creative government actions on the local level and the federal level. So we have more mixed use housing. I mean, think about in cities building modest income, modest cost housing near subway stops and bus stops, and where restaurants and especially grocery stores and other kind of services are nearby. That helps. I mean, part of this is always keeping the issues of climate front and center. The more housing like that we build, the more energy efficient new housing we build, especially near transportation hubs, will help people afford the housing. They won't. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine who's been successful economically. She grew up in Ohio. She lived in New York. She's never owned a car until she moved back to Ohio. She's in her 40s. And there's a lot of opportunities like that you can do if we're all creative, and that means communities, it means government, it means local developers, it means local housing authorities.
As I understand it, you've been out talking to Ohioans about their housing experiences, which sounds really cool to me. I mean, but what have you been hearing? Has it shifted dramatically because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, everything's different because of the pandemic, and nobody, first of all, very few people thought they'd be home as much as they have, and we know the social issues and the mental health issues around that. But I don't think you use a tragedy for a better day. But I do think we've learned a lot. I mean, more people are going to be working from home, certainly after the pandemic than before the pandemic. I mean, most people go back to work. Many people go to work now, of course, especially the essential workers who aren't paid as well and who expose themselves to the virus every day and then come home anxious that, the grocery store worker, the bus driver, the food preparer, the custodian, the security guard, the people who work at hospitals go home every night wondering if they've infected their families because they're exposed during the day. So I think we answer a lot of those questions, and people that understand this better than I are going to be really thinking this through. What do we do on the local level, the state level, the federal level to help people do that, and to make all the way. I mean, so much of who we are as a country is where we live and the opportunities we give. And to grow up as the zip code, I may have mentioned this to you before, Steve, in another interview, the zip code that my wife and I live in 2007 in Cleveland, 44105, had more foreclosures than any zip code in the United States. You can still see the remnants of that, where so many people lost homes. Those homes fell into disrepair in our zip code, and they recover very, very slowly. And we need to think through what that means. We need to think through what lead-based paint means to families that want to move into these neighborhoods and start another life with relatively low-cost housing. But we've got to do other things around that.
Senator, well, I'm really appreciate you mentioning that financial crisis, because there are still, as you said, in Ohio, but still places around the country that still to this day people are underwater on their mortgage. It's just there's got to be a better way to keep people in their homes, and rearrange the equities there so that people get some support. Let me just squeeze in one last small thing. I'm just interested in Ohio. Ohio is such a placeholder on so many of the issues, manufacturing, how you go from one kind of economy to another. It was constantly on President Trump's, talk list about what to do. And I'm just interested in your experience there. Do you have any sense that there are any green spouts that you're seeing that are helping Ohio turn itself and its future around in directions where either manufacturing is coming back, or there's going to be sort of a new next thing that will be robust for the state and opportunities? I just want to get in your head on that and see if there's anything you see out there.
Well, there is in the central Ohio, the Columbus metropolitan area, there still is strong growth. It's much about a university and a healthcare and sort of white collar jobs like insurance and banking. Those jobs pay very well for some, but are fairly low income jobs. I remember at my high school reunion a few years ago, not that many years ago, a woman said, I've worked as a bank teller for 30 years and I'm making $30,000 a year. So many of those jobs, many of these companies are now talking about a minimum wage and raising pay, and they need to do that for their contract workers too, the food service, the security guards, and the custodial crews. But many of the good paying manufacturing jobs have shifted. We've just got to make sure that we sort of lead on those issues and build around. I was just on the phone today with somebody from the Transportation Research Center and a quasi-government agency group in central Ohio that's maybe leading the world in zero emissions kinds of
Right.
creating transportation that can really and we're a big transportation hub in terms of manufacture. So there are a lot of opportunities like that in Ohio that we need to explore better than we have.
Well, Senator Sherrod Brown, I always learn from you, and I really admire how you go deep into these issues. You can just feel it in the way you talk about them. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, Steve. Thank you. Good to see you again.
Thank you.